Hello and welcome to the first in what I intend to be a series of painting and history videos. Today's miniature is a French musketeer around the early 1600s, the time of the wars of religion. It's my first time recording my painting process and it's a bit of a trial. I've squeezed about 5 hours of footage into a 15-minute video, but in the future you can expect step-by-step tutorials. I didn't begin recording until I was about most of the way through the base coating process, but basically I just used a priming coat of Tamiya white spray and then base coated the miniature with acrylic paints from Jo Sonja. Now it's on to the oil paints, which is the fun part. I'm using a thinner composed of 1 part liquid fine detail medium to 2 parts of artist turpentine. You want to ensure that your oil paints are a nice thin consistency, almost like a wash but not quite. Start by painting the shadows on the figure. Here I'm going to be using ivory black to shade the trousers and the sleeves of the figure, which are painted with burnt umber. Now I'm painting the midtones and the highlights. I should add that the exact tones used for the acrylic base coat are not really that important here. What's more important is that the final oil colour you paint on top is the colour that you want. So here I'm using burnt umber oil paint with an increasing amount of white mixed in. The great advantage of oil paints is that you can continuously re-blend and re-highlight and re-shade. I'm going with a very general light source for this model, and I don't want to emphasize it too much. I find this works best unless you have a very specific diorama idea in mind. The sun will be hitting our musketeer here from the above and to the front. As long as the miniature looks three-dimensional, I'm satisfied. And now it's time to paint his feather plume. The less contrast here, the better, because you want the feather to appear soft. I'm using predominantly yellow ochre for his buff leather waistcoat. His gauntlets and his boots could be the same colour, but seeing as they're natural leather items, to add a bit of interest I used a more beige tone for those. The shading is all done with burnt umber. Finally, I mixed in a bit of white for the highlights. And onto the hat. For this I'm using ivory black for the shadows and mixing in some white for the highlights. Every now and then, and particularly when changing colours, it's important to clean and moisten the brush in thinner. Here I'm painting the musket stock and the powder flask with a combination of burnt sienna and ivory black. You might notice that I go back to fix up mistakes along the way, or even just to readjust previous colours. Now I started darkening the metallic areas of the figure using ivory black. In hindsight, I would have done better to base coat them with a darker acrylic in the first place. I wasn't entirely convinced with the wet blended non-metallic metal areas on this figure. If you look at famous military paintings such as those by Edouard Detail, you'll notice that metallic areas such as musket barrels or swords are often painted with a combination of straight white and straight black without any blending at all. In the end, I decided to let the metallic areas dry and redo them the next day, this time with less blending. For the gauntlets, the crossbelts and the boots, I made a beige colour by mixing a tiny bit of burnt umber into white. For some reason I found it really challenging to achieve a strong definition with this colour. In the end I decided to let this dry as well and to come back and add a bit more contrast to it the next day. I gave the base a first coat of yellow ochre, which is the traditional and most common colour for bases on flat figures, and I decided to call it a night. And here we are, day 2. I don't usually intend to spend this long on one figure, but he was a test piece for the rest of the unit, which is about 17 other figures. In any case, it's a good idea to let the figure dry for 24 hours before you paint the finer details. What would the Renaissance be without slashed sleeves and blue stockings? I didn't have any green oil paint, so I mixed some up for his tassels and piping. Returning to the metallic areas, I used some ivory black to darken them up, and then some straight flat white to add that bit of contrast that it needs. I painted the buttons on his breeches with just a dot of black and a dot of white within that, and this gave a really convincing effect. Now for his match cord, I painted it with flat white, then I went back with a bit of burnt sienna for the shadows. Now his shirt collar is also white, but I did it the opposite way around, starting with burnt sienna in the shadows and then painting some white. I'll explain in the future video why I do it the opposite way around for items that are the same colour sometimes. Just a few final adjustments here and there. Just adding a final coat of yellow ochre to his base once again. And that is it, he's finished. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I've got plenty more videos planned for the future to do with history, painting and all sorts of other crafts.